I have the privilege to introduce Lieutenant General Hodges here today. You have all had access to his biography. I don't want to tell you when he went to which school, in which country, and what he has done. We all know once you have 3 stars, you have accomplished something. And he's indeed a celebrity in Germany. I can only confirm that. We are very grateful when the modern times of transatlantic relations started after World War II. And that was the wisdom of the United States to establish a firm system of institutions like the NATO, like the United Nations, like the World Health Organization, World Trade Organization, to bring a little bit of calmness and tranquility after the 2 horrible world wars. And it was in that idea that I founded the Zeitgeist Foundation 8 years ago. The main thing was transatlantic relations, because it is so important as we can see it right now. And it was relatively easy to address various segments of the society to bring aspects of Germany here, like art, like culture, like journalism, like politics, and so on. One segment was always missing, that was military. And until I was introduced to General Hodges through a common friend who was responsible for Point Alpha, by the way. Point Alpha is the point where the Warsaw Pact was the most to the west into Germany, where everybody expected that the tanks from Russia would come over if they ever attacked. And I was introduced to him, and it was very quickly that we had an understanding that we had to do more than just shake hands, that we had to convey the message of transatlantic relations and their importance also in the military aspect. And so he agreed very, very easily to come to Charlotte. He's here tonight. He's here today and tonight. We will go to Chapel Hill, and we bring his message also to Charleston. And I have to say that I'm very, very happy, very honored that he kept his word in times where he's so much needed by the whole world, by all the big television and radio stations, but also the military is seeking his advice, and he has followed through and stood by his commitment to come to Charlton. For that, I'm very grateful. Thank you very much. Help me, please, to greet him and welcome here to Charlotte.
Okay, so I'm going to use my timer so I don't run over too long, okay? And what I'd like to do is go about 15, 18 minutes and then save the last half hour for questions about what you really would like to talk about. So I'm going to put a few things out there to maybe spur the thinking, but I sense if you belong to this organization that you're already paying close attention to what's happening not only around the world, but and certainly in Ukraine, and that's going to be my focus. I'm really thrilled, though, to see some students here, what that represents. And you guys must have gotten like a day off or 5 extra points or something to volunteer to come hear this. But really excited that you are here. Also, you know, it's easy to watch videos of tanks and explosions and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, it's people. I mean, there are human beings underneath every one of those horrible explosions. There's human beings associated with every aspect of the hundreds of thousands of refugees that are doing their best to get to Poland. You've been watching, of course, now the law in Ukraine is if you're between the age of 18 and 60, you cannot leave the country. And nobody's complaining about that, but you've got fathers that are taking their kids to the Polish border, handing them over, and coming back. So there's people. And by the way, the Russians, the young privates, conscripts who are being sent into Ukraine as part of this. There's a family attached to every one of them. By the way, if you're a private in the Russian army and you're killed, your family gets $100. All right, so I think one of the themes here, and I hope that our government and the allies are pushing the information to reach the Russian public. By the way, Twitter's been shut down, most of their social media's been shut down. They don't have access to news like we do. And so if we can kind of help penetrate that and help the Russian population understand what's actually going on. The reason I picked this up, you see I have this ribbon, it's obviously the colors of Ukraine. I've had that for about 6 years. I was in the city of Lviv when I was still in the Army, and Lviv in the far west end of Ukraine is next to this major training area called Yavoriv, where the United States Army helped set up a training area that looked a whole lot like the training area that General Seismic used to command in Fort Polk, Louisiana, to help Ukrainian forces learn and prepare before they would get sent to the front. And I was standing there in Lviv in my uniform, and there's an older lady. Now that I'm 63, older has a whole different meaning than it did a few years ago. But this lady came walking up, and I'm standing next to a Lithuanian friend, and she speaks in Ukrainian and says, you know, who are you guys? And my Lithuanian friend says, well, this is General Hodges from the U.S. Army. And she said, U.S. Army? And he said, yeah. And she burst into tears. And she took that ribbon off of her purse. And so I've held on to it for those 6 years. And the reason I do that, of course, is that's what the United States represents to most of the world. Nobody expects us, nobody thinks we're perfect. Nobody expects us to be perfect, but they have such high expectations of us, and they are crushed when we don't live up to those expectations. But nonetheless, they have such high expectations of us, and I keep that ribbon as a reminder. 4 weeks ago, I was in Kyiv. I had the chance to meet President Zelenskyy in his office. I thought it was going to be about a 15-minute sort of thing, and we ended up being in there for about an hour and 15 minutes. That guy is a fighter. I think the whole world's falling in love with President Zelenskyy right now. You can go ahead. Obviously not a career politician, so he doesn't speak like a career politician. He was a comedic actor up until about 2 years ago, and he has a sense of humor, no doubt about it. But he is very intelligent. He spoke English, frankly, much better than I had expected because I hadn't seen him speak English too much in the past. He impressed on me that he understood what the threat was, but he also said, look, this is about my economy. The Russians are trying to cause the collapse of my government by causing the collapse of our economy. And so much of what Russia has been doing for the past 8 years since they invaded Ukraine was blocking ports like Mariupol and Verdansk in the Sea of Azov. Ukraine has an incredible agricultural sector. It has incredible deposits of rare earth materials that have to be exported. And of course, the Russians don't want that. They want to cause the collapse of the government. And so he understood that. He said, I don't need American soldiers in Ukraine. So if any of you are thinking, or your people say, why aren't we sending troops there? He doesn't want them there. He doesn't need them there. In fact, the Ukrainian army actually has more troops than the Russian army inside what is in Ukraine. They're a huge disadvantage in terms of air power and sea power, but they don't need American troops there. He said, I don't need British troops, I don't need German soldiers. He said, I need the tools so we can defend ourselves. And I need the financial resources to keep my economy afloat, and so that I can grow the size of my own army. But he really impressed me with his kind of a fighting spirit. And it's not surprising that the Kremlin, has him as #1 on their target list. So that's the first guy that they would like to kill or capture and drag him out of there. He was not terribly popular, actually, here just a few weeks ago. I mean, his popularity had gone down. They have severe domestic political issues going on there. But fortunately for Ukraine, and frankly, fortunately for us, this guy has risen to the occasion. And personal courage, and I think certainly the line of the war so far, he said, I don't need a ride, I just need ammunition. And I think that's why just about every country in the European Union now, even Swiss are piling on to that. We want some of that too. And this is the power of positive leadership, the power of personal example, the power of personal courage. People gravitate towards that. They don't expect him to be a genius on everything, but doggone it, he's out there walking around with a cell phone telling his own country and the rest of the world, I am still here. By the way, how can he still have cell service? I thought the Russians were so good, they were just shock and awe. you can be sure if you're on SWAT ever plan the operation, the first thing you do is you turn out the lights, you turn out the communications, you decapitate the ability of your enemy to command and control. And here we are at day 6, and the president of Ukraine still has cell service. Now, I think that this is one of the points I want to raise today. Why have the Russian armed forces performed so poorly? I think this is a case where you've got Ukrainian armed forces are overperforming and Russian armed forces are underperforming. Now, there are some people say, that's because they got the best guys are still waiting to come in. And there probably are some other things that haven't been employed yet. But I think based on what I see all the indicators of a large military force that has not trained to the level that we do. They don't have the experience of conducting operations of over 100,000 people with air, land, sea power, special forces. Every single airfield that they tried to secure with their airborne and with their special forces, every single one of them was failed. If they captured it, they got pushed off. And when you look at how they did it, it's the opposite of how you should do it. And this is a very hard operation that our airborne, our Rangers practice all the time. And my sense is that they have not trained at that level. The fuel and ammunition consumption in wartime is always so much more than what you think it's going to be. I mean, think of the irony, Russia, vehicles are running out of fuel. I mean, they're not even 50 miles from their own border, and they're running out of fuel. How can that be? To me, this is poor logistical planning. The key for any logistician is anticipation. They were not ready for this. I really do think they were going to be in there in about 3 days, and it was all going to be done. And obviously, that's not the case. In fact, I would say, you can quote me on this, and I will buy Klaus lunch tomorrow if I'm wrong. Kyiv is not going to fall. I think it's entirely infeasible. It's not going to fall because this is a city of 3.5 million people. Now, I've been in Charlotte a few times. I think you're somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million population. Let's just say 1 million. Your big football stadium here holds 80,000 people. So in the news, when they say, oh my God, there's 150,000 Russian troops, well, that's just 2 times your football stadium. That doesn't sound quite so bad after all. And then, depending on where you live in Charlotte, let's say the football game's over and everybody's getting in their car and driving away. If you live 2 or 3 miles away from the stadium, you don't even know what's happening. I mean, really, you don't see it. So the idea that thousands of Russian troops are going to encircle Kyiv, a city that's 3.5 million people, a massive city, and that they're going to go through and clear it and take it over, mathematically impossible, unless every Ukrainian soldier just surrendered on the spot and everybody took their Molotov cocktail and went home. So I don't think it's feasible, and certainly based on what I've seen of Russian forces and what I've seen of Ukrainian forces and Ukrainian people, it's going to be bad for Russian soldiers to get anywhere near Kyiv. Now this big, gigantic convoy of 40 miles or whatever that all the media and so many others are watching breathlessly, first of all, most of those are trucks full of supplies. And they're soft trucks with a canvas top or something like that. This is not 40 miles of tanks. I wish it was 40 miles of tanks. I mean, I started drooling when I saw that long row of vehicles. This is a dream opportunity if you've got the ability to hit it. Of course, it's going to be well protected by air defense. And the Russians have air superiority, so the Ukrainians, I imagine, are trying to protect the remaining drones that they have, the remaining aircraft they have, to pick the right time. But I'm pretty sure that within the next 2 or 3 days, most of that convoy is either going to be on fire or certainly halted, or maybe even turning around. Another indicator for me, and there's probably a handful of people in here who are sergeants in the Army or the Marine Corps or the Navy, it's obvious that they do not have a corps of non-commissioned officers or sergeants in the Russian Army. Every video I have seen of destroyed Russian convoys, the vehicles are bumper to bumper. I mean, they're all on top of each other. That's the absolute wrong way to be. If you're in a combat tactical situation, your vehicles should generally be at least 50 meters and maybe 100 meters apart to avoid everybody getting hit and destroyed in one thing. And yet, every picture I've seen, they're bumper to bumper. That means they're not training. They don't have non-commissioned officers, junior officers that know how to train and enforce discipline. Because it's not a natural thing. I guarantee a private in the U.S. Army does not show up in a box like that. They have to be trained and you have to have discipline. And so what I'm seeing are indicators for discipline. The downside of all this, I mean, I don't want to make this too rosy a picture. There are still tens of thousands of Russian troops with a lot of capability that are still coming. And unfortunately, here on day 6, they are already starting to do what they did in Chechnya, which is to indiscriminately start hitting civilian targets. So, yeah, everybody in here probably saw that missile that hit the big municipal building in Kharkiv this morning. Saw the missile that hit the apartment building 2 days ago in Kyiv. This is going to get worse. Before it gets better, I hate to say it, it's going to get a lot worse because I think there's a lot of frustration right now in the Kremlin. I'd give anything to be a fly on the wall and watch those past chewings that are happening there. Like, why are we not there? Some of you, if you're a history nerd, you know, in 1945, the Soviets under Stalin, everybody was racing to get to Berlin, and they wanted to get to Berlin before the Americans could. And so Stalin had his two lead field marshals, Field Marshal Zhukov and Field Marshal Konev, and he would tell Konev, hey, what's your problem? Zhukov made 20 miles yesterday. He's going to beat you to Berlin. And then he would call Zhukov, he said, what's your problem? Konev is in the outskirts of Berlin, why can't you get there? And so these two super egos wanted to be the first into Berlin. Tens of thousands of soldiers died because who was going to get there first? This is the same personality that's in place in the general staff right now. And they have, at that leadership level, I think they have zero concern about human life, and whatever it takes, they're going to do it. So that's what we're dealing with. And that's why I also think that we have to be realistic about the possibility of nuclear weapons. Now, I don't think it's going to happen. Of course, I don't think too many people thought he was going to invade Ukraine in 2014, or that he was going to do what he's doing right now. And that's been our problem with Vladimir Putin, is that we keep trying to make assumptions about how he would think through our filter, instead of why does he think? And I hear experts on TV all the time now trying to guess, like, what's wrong with that guy? I mean, he's different than he was 3, 4, 5 years ago. And I mean, in a way, it's comical, but it's still tragic that he sits at the table, even from his closest advisors. I mean, Lavrov is lucky to get within 10 meters of him. So, I mean, what a bizarre sort of thing. And I'm pretty sure there's not a lot of people sitting around the boss's desk saying, hey, Mr. President, I'm not sure we want to do this, or that's not a good idea, or so he's not getting the kind of thing that any successful manager or leader in here would demand. This was a problem. So I don't know who is telling him, no matter what, it will be the end of us if we use any nuclear weapon in or near Ukraine. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And there are speculation that they might use a small nuclear weapon, what we call a low-yield tactical nuclear weapon, maybe on a target to demonstrate, to raise the pressure. Because in the past, I think most European countries, and maybe even some in the American administration, would have hesitated. But I think we're in a different place now. I think there is so much unity between the Allies. The best diplomatic effort I've seen since 1995, when the United States government led the diplomatic effort to achieve what we call the Dayton Peace Accords, which is what brought about an end to the fighting in the former Yugoslavia. That was an incredible, intensive diplomatic effort with American leadership. What I've seen in the last few months is the best I've seen since then. And it's not America saying, you will do this. It genuinely is American leadership working with our allies. And I think the administration deserves a ton of credit. Secretary Blinken deserves a ton of credit for what they've done, but all of our diplomats, ambassadors, and people in the staff, in the State Department at every level. This has been important. And by the way, we still have a lot of really important ambassadorial posts that are not filled. They've been nominated, but they haven't been confirmed yet. To me, how can you not, I mean, I'm not stupid, I understand some of this, but to hold up ambassadorial nominations for critical countries at a time when we're trying to get American leadership in there, I think that you should take a look and ask, and I don't know, by the way, but are your senators, you know, are they helping or hurting in the process of getting ambassador positions filled? Let me just touch on one or two more things real quick here, and then I look forward to questions. What happens after this? I mean, I don't know how this is going to end. I'm 100% confident that Kyiv is not going to fall, but I don't imagine that the Russians are going to say, we really miscalculated, we're out of here. They're not going to, it'll be very unlikely that they're just going to willingly give up things. Obviously, I would love to see us with a successful information effort combined with a huge diplomatic and economic effort that's underway, so that the Russian people said, you know, 3 centuries of being treated like crap by our leaders is enough. And I make a very clear distinction between Russian leadership and Russian people. Russian people have suffered under their leaders more than any of the countries on their periphery. At some point, they've got to say, this is enough. I don't like the phrase regime change. I've been associated with a couple of them that turned out really badly. But I think helping people make their own choices is something that why would we not want to be there? And the power of America's example, the information, so that people can make their own decisions. I think we should be doubling down on that. China, I think the Chinese Communist Party is watching very closely. The Chinese have no interest in being associated with Russia, except for the gas that they need. I think they look at Russia as a gigantic gas station. And of course, Russia intends to try and control the Arctic. For the first time in history, last February last year, a ship sailed through the Arctic in the month of February. First time in history of the planet. And it's only going to get better. So the Chinese, of course, are anxious to start moving vessels through the Arctic. It'll save several days of transit time, has a lot of money if you're in the transportation business. Russia has said, welcome, but we control that. And of course, the great U.S. Navy said, I don't think so. So this is going to be another place of conflict. But the Chinese are not allies of Russia. They're happy to see us struggle with Russia, but they're not allies of Russia. But I do worry that if we, the United States, with all of our European allies and partners, our combined economic, diplomatic, and military strength, cannot stop President Putin from invading Ukraine and taking over Ukraine, I don't think they're going to be too impressed with anything that we say about Taiwan or the South China Sea. So this goes way beyond just whether or not they are successful in Ukraine. It has global implications there. The last thing I'd say is that I live in Frankfurt, Germany. I'm originally from, I say Tallahassee because nobody knows where Quincy is. Quincy is the little north outside of Tallahassee. And so I still claim that as home, but I live in Frankfurt, Germany. I've been there for the 4 years since I retired. And I have European friends and neighbors all the time say, Ben, what is going on? I mean, what is happening to the United States? Every one of them either went to school in the U.S., they sent their kids to the school in the U.S., they have a business connection in the U.S., or they go on holiday there. 100%. And even though the favorite sport in Europe is to criticize America, America is still the iconic that they all aspire to, that they all love our country. And they all grew up. Now, Klaus, he knows the Constitution not because he's old enough to have known Thomas Jefferson, but because they grow up understanding our Constitution. And they're wondering, like, again, they know we're not perfect, but they're like, January 6th, I mean, people walking around shaking their heads. They're astounded. And they see our vulnerability, and unfortunately, it feels a little bit like, it's not that way in Germany yet, but you can almost feel it. It's beginning to get that way, that you've got extremists on both sides there. And I think most thoughtful Germans are beginning to worry about it. Thoughtful Brits are beginning to worry about it. Thoughtful French are beginning step forward and be the leader here and live up. We have to live up to our own talking points. That's how I'd say it. You know, all the stuff that makes our country successful, incredible young people that are able to live up to their potential. They're given opportunity, no matter where they came from. It's not a bumper sticker to me that we are the land of immigrants. That's truth. If I went to every table, I'd get at least 5 different ethnic origins just looking at your last name. Okay, that's who we are, and I think living up to our own talking points would be a great start to pushing back on autocracy and inspiring people to do that themselves. All right, I look forward to your questions.
Folks, I'm Mike Holman. I'm on the board of the World Affairs Council. We're going to fill this last half hour up, I can guarantee you. And we're going to ask General Swanek to ask the first question or observation. But before he does that, I want to introduce him. We have a lot of luminaries that come speak to us, like Ben Hodges. It's rare that we have their boss in the audience, and that's what General Chuck Swanek was. He was the commanding officer for this guy up here. So let's give General Swanek a big round of applause. And while you're up, General Swanek, what do you got to say to this guy? Or what's the question?
Well, first of all, Ben, thanks for that overview. I guess the thing that's still on my mind is not the ending, but I think how Putin, is there an off-ramp for Putin, a safe off-route for Putin, or has he got to go, in your opinion? Repeat the question.
All right, so the question is there an off-ramp for Putin? How does he get out of this saving face somehow? I mean, because he's going to have to go back to his own people and say, let me explain why it was worth all these thousands of young Russian soldiers that were killed, and the whole world hates us and our economy is in tatters. Let me tell you why it was worthwhile. That will be a hard sell. So I imagine that the U.S. government and other governments are thinking of ways to give him some sort of off-ramp without giving away anything about Ukraine. And certainly the Ukrainians are not going to sign up for a negotiated settlement where they lost even more of their country. I would not expect, unless the war started going terribly against them. I would imagine that China could play a key role here, maybe even offering a retirement home. I mean, seriously, a place to go to. There's probably 1 or 2 countries that would be willing to take him, especially if they were given some kind of compensation for that in some way. That maybe something like that. I don't have enough of a good feel for what's going on inside the Kremlin, for how loyal people really are. I think with a guy like Mr. Abramovich, who is worth about $13 billion, owns the Chelsea Football Club in the UK, and also has, I think, 8 yachts. You know, when he starts putting pressure on Putin, then I think we'll feel it. So it's the right approach to go after them. That maybe he steps down or is taken down. But I can't think of that train has left the station. I mean, there was a time, a week ago, where he could have declared victory. I got the Americans to talk. I got the Americans to promise they'd never put nuclear weapons in Ukraine, which we were never going to do. I got more transparency. I mean, he could have listed 10 things and gone home without losing a single soldier. So that's what we're dealing with. And so I think a traditional negotiated settlement doesn't seem likely, as long as we all stick together.
Thank you. We're going to John Gallus, who is the head of the Charlotte World Trade Association. Then we're going to Charlotte Country Day School, table number 1, and Megan Motley. John.
I believe it was yesterday, President Zelenskyy asked the U.S. or NATO for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Could you talk a little bit about all the considerations involved in making that?
That's a great question, because that probably is number 1 on the list from the Ukrainian side, is please just get the Russian Air Force off our back. And that air power, we take it for granted in the United States, that we always have total control of the air, at least up until now. And so this is a problem for Ukrainian armed forces. The problem with a no-fly zone, it's not a declaration that it's observed, it's something that has to be enforced. And because our president and all the other leaders of the NATO countries have said, we are not at the point where we're ready to put young American women and men into Ukraine, where you end up with a force-on-force NATO versus Russia or U.S. versus Russia. Not that we're in doubt of the outcome of that particular fight, but the implications would be potentially horrific. So think about a no-fly zone. So if this is Ukraine, and this means in Ukrainian airspace, and and the no-fly zone says no Russian aircraft can come into Ukrainian airspace. That means you have to have your aircraft up there to force them out, to shoot them down. So you've already got a kinetic component to it. And if you're ever going to put your own Air Force up there, you do something that's called SEAD, S-E-A-D, Suppression of Enemy Air Defense. You would never allow Russian air defense, whether it was inside sovereign Russian territory or inside Ukrainian territory, to just sit there and shoot down your own pilots. So in addition to looking for other Russian aircraft, you're doing a very deliberate, sophisticated operation to take out Russian air defense. So now you're shooting at targets on the ground inside Russia. And then, of course, the third thing is it would be almost inevitable that at least one of our aircraft would be hit, and now you've got a pilot that's ejected, and he's parachuting down, and he's landing either in Ukraine or in Russia, and you got to go get him. And of course, our great Air Force practices this all the time. They have very good teams that are designed to go in and get people. So there's three reasons right there where I don't think the president is prepared to do that. At some point we may be, and then I think our president will stand up and tell the American people, like, we're going to do this, and here's why it's to our interest that we do this.
So, we've got two tables from Charlotte Country Day School. First up is table one, Macon, or whoever you've designated, there we go. And then we'll go to number two later. David Lynn taking pictures back there as the head of the Charlotte Country Day contingent, head of the international programs out there. Yes, sir.
So there's been a lot of reporting lately about Russian mercenaries as those being sent. So my question is, if President Zelenskyy is caught or captured or killed, what are the next steps for Ukraine? What kind of international response events are?
So the question was, what happens if President Zelenskyy is killed or captured by the Russians? That would be a blow, but I am sure that inside the Ukrainian government that they've thought through a succession plan that you would expect from a government, and I certainly would hope it would be somebody that would be had the same sort of courage and charisma, the ability to communicate that he does. I have to say, President Poroshenko has impressed me. He's kind of on the rebound. I mean, he and Zelenskyy are not friends, but you see President Poroshenko, who, by the way, has lost about 30 pounds since he was in office. I mean, he's looking pretty fit the other day, and he's got it carrying his AK-47 around. So I mean, he's out on the street too. This is a zillionaire. So I mean, there are legitimate leaders out there, I think, that would have to step up, but that would be a blow. Now, we've learned our own lesson. I don't know how many times we, the U.S., killed the emir of Mosul, the top-ranked al-Qaeda guy in northern Iraq. General Casey used to say the only job less desirable than his own was to be the emir of Mosul, because every one of them got killed immediately. And so we know that just because you kill the leader doesn't mean that the organization, the team falls apart. But that'd be a blow. That would be a blow.
Questions? I call on people, by the way, if I don't see hands. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for your service, many years of it. It was very encouraging to hear the European Union and a number of countries in the U.S. Say we're going to provide a lot of resources to Ukraine, whether it's guns, ammunition, and so how realistic is it that we can actually get that to the folks that are going to pull the trigger of those lessons?
Yeah, so excellent question about logistics. How are we getting, let's say everybody provides Javelin and Stinger, which is a short-range air defense system, and all the other stuff that Ukrainians are needing, and we want to put in their hands that they can use right away. Of course, if you can't have U.S. inside Ukraine, that means you're not going to have U.S. Air Force C-17s flying it into a Ukrainian airfield. Of course, we have always relied, or for many years have relied on commercial aircraft, contract aircraft to do things for us in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I imagine that there are companies that are already saying, I mean, that would be quite lucrative on top of being quite dangerous. So there's probably some of that. But I imagine also that the distribution networks, first of all, are bringing things to Poland, and then somewhere there in Poland, or maybe a few places, the Poles and U.S. Army's 21st Theater Sustainment Command, which is the real logistics muscle in Europe, have got it going on. They've got things coming in. Our logisticians know how to do this, just like I think probably there's people in here that are in that business. And then it's being handed over to Ukrainians somehow. And there'd be just an internal distribution network where it gets to where the Ukrainians say, we need more Javelin over here, we need more Stinger over here, we need more helmets here, or things like that. So, and this is also the kind of thing, obviously we didn't have a plan for it when it started, but it gets momentum as they start figuring out the flow. I think it will probably, pretty soon they will be awash in javelins and body armor and pistols, but right now it's paper thin. There may be some flying that still goes on. I doubt anybody will be flying into the Kyiv Boryspil airport, the main airport. But there are numerous other airports and military airfields all over Ukraine that could be used. I imagine that's how they're doing it.
So we're going to go to Harrison Marshall way in the back, Paul Cardews over here, then to Charlotte Country Day number 2. So Harrison, you can't hide back there, buddy.
All right, thanks, Mike. General, we hear so much about this 40-mile convoy. Everybody seems to think that's going to be the end of Kyiv. You indicated today that that's mostly soft vehicles and resupply vehicles. Help me feel better about that, because I came here, I was up at 5 o'clock in the morning checking CNN at the airport. That's how it was.
Yeah, it's amazing how, first of all, intelligence is so much more available now, commercially available satellites, that everybody can become an imagery analyst and start looking at what that looks like or whatever. And the way it's described, it's almost like this lava flow that's just moving inexorably towards Kyiv somehow. I think that what we're seeing is a gigantic logistics convoy that appears to be moving on one road, which is ironic. I mean, in doctrine, normally a brigade, I think, would have at least 2 roads, 2 parallel roads for a brigade in the advance that was doing road marches. Just because you don't want to have everything out like that, you're so vulnerable, and you've only got one sharp pointy end on it, so you want to have a broader front. But yet what I've seen, it looks like one gigantic convoy, like that scene on Field of Dreams, you remember the last scene where you just got headlights as far as you can see going over the distance. That's what it looks like. I mean, that just doesn't look like a professional planned operation. Of course, the infrastructure around in Ukraine is not going to be exactly what you would find here in North Carolina or South Carolina. Although I will say I-95 sucks in South Carolina. It is a terrible. That is the first stretch of I-95. And I love South Carolina. Beaufort is where I have my place in the States, but I know I-95. But anyway, I think part of this is infrastructure, but part of it is just poor planning and poor discipline. And there's probably 3 or 4 points along there where there's a critical bridge or some place where you could really gum it all up for the Russians. And I'm sure the Ukrainians obviously know exactly where those places are.
Guess what I was hearing was that the ground was softer than you might expect this time of year. But I was everybody's going down one road.
Well, you probably conducted investigations into several of the stations over the years.
Paul Carduce.
Now that Europe has kind of found their voice and the German government providing monetary support for weapons and things like that, how do you see that changing how the EU functions in situations like this?
So this was an earthquake when the German government made the announcements it did the other day. Now, of course, the Bundestag, the German parliament, still has to vote on all this. And so it's not a given. There's still going to be serious political debate. But I think the courage of Chancellor Scholz, Klaus and Christian are going to laugh at me as an American trying to explain the German coalition government. But so you guys grade my paper on this. There's real courage. Chancellor Scholz has to protect his left flank the same way that President Biden has to protect his left flank too. I mean, they have internal debates going on, but I think, fortunately, the Green Party has been the toughest of all of the parties, even tougher than the Christian Democrats on Russia. And so, the three strongest voices have been Oben Noripur, who is a Green parliamentarian, Annalena Baerbock, who is the foreign minister, and then Mr. Robert Habeck, who is the vice chancellor, the number 2 guy, but also he's the minister over a super ministry that includes economy and environment. The three of them are tougher than anybody on Russia. So I think they'll get a combination of votes in the Bundestag of Greens, SPD, the Liberal Democrats, and then also the party that's in opposition, the Christian Democrats, will be enough to support what Chancellor Scholz wants to do. Is that? And I've always thought that Germany was the key. Germany, over the last 70 years, has accrued a sort of moral authority since the war that, in addition to being the economic power of Europe, this moral authority, the champion of European values, the champion of the post-war international order. I think the Germans realized they were at risk of losing that credibility. You can't claim to be the champion of European values and then just stand there while the Russians come in and smash it. And meanwhile, be buying gas from them and have, I think there's something like 5,000 businesses in Russia, Russian business connections. None of that's illegal, but don't come wag your finger at me about maybe we don't have exactly perfect voting here, or the Poles are getting a little tired of being lectured by the Germans. And so I think Germany realized that they were in danger of, they were watching their credibility erode. And that would have been bad for the United States, because the United States needs a very strong, confident Germany, because we need the European Union for economic reasons. I mean, Europe is our biggest, most important trading partner for a long time to come. And we need the EU. And if you don't have good German leadership in there, then the EU is going to start coming apart also. So this has much more than, it's much more than just sending weapons to Ukraine. And it's much more than just turning off or stopping the certification process of Nord Stream 2. By the way, the United States is still, we're still importing Russian oil today. I was astounded when I learned that, because none of our political leaders want to hear Americans complaining about gas prices. Shame on us. If we're barking at Germans and others for doing that, and we're still doing it here because we want to keep gas to below $4 a gallon or even below $5. Europeans, you're only paying $5 a gallon? Holy hell. So I think we need to, we have some work to do here, and I hope the president will bring that up tonight to explain why, yes, your gas prices are going to go up, because there are some things more important than gas that's under $5. I can't believe I said that.
You'll be glad to hear, General Hodges, that Governor Cooper just banned the import of all Russian vodka.
Oh, now you're serious. Hold on.
So Charlotte Country Day, number 2, Table 2, and then Daryl Holloway who give us some German perspective as well as a great internationalist.
and move her to the front of the class. That is a terrific question. So many of our international organizations have failed. I mean, Russia is a member of every international body there is, except I think the Major League Baseball and NATO. I mean, they're in all of them. They're in the OSCE. They're on the Security Council of the United Nations. They used to be in the G8, which is now the G7. I mean, they're in everything. The problem is, as the great Bismarck once said, that no treaty with Russia is worth the paper it's written on. They don't live up to any agreement that they're a part of. I mean, President Reagan was famous for saying trust but verify. So any agreement we have with the Soviets and now with the Russians, you've got to have an enforcement protocol. Part of the reason we got out of the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, was because Russia had been violating it for years. Everybody in Europe knew it. I mean, even though President Trump was not terribly popular over in NATO, everybody agreed with him on this case. That, yeah, doggone Russians, they've been violating it for years. Well, why didn't you do something? I mean, other countries have to put pressure on Russia to live up to it. And the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is headquartered in Vienna. We have a great ambassador there now, by the way, Mike Carpenter. Russia's a part of the OSCE. The OSCE was given the task, or took the task, to have monitors in the Donbass region to watch enforcement of the Minsk agreements. Routinely, every day, the so-called separatists and Russian troops would block them, would knock down their drones, so they were never allowed to do their job. And Russia got paid zero price for that. So these are all organizations that should be doing it. I think there is something, and there's probably somebody in here that is an expert. I think there's going to be a serious effort to relook the rules for UN Security Council. If you can have one country, including us, that can block everything, I mean, what a toothless organization. So and that'll be hard because you've got 2 out of the 5 that has zero interest in giving up their veto. Actually 3, including us. So this will be very difficult to do. But I mean, the fact that there is movement on that, I think is important. Otherwise, these international bodies really are not as helpful as they should be. And most of our European friends, especially Germany, believe intensely in international organizations because they serve as designed in the post-war, the years right after World War II. They act as a brake on things, on sliding into a kinetic conflict. So it's in all of our interest for these systems to work. And by the way, when you leave an international organization, you give up any influence. You're not happy with the UN? I'm tired of paying for them, you leave? Okay, guess what impact you had? Zero. Now you can't influence it at all. So I think when our government should lead, not leave. Of course, you can be irritated that others don't do what they should, but when you walk away from it, you pay a bigger price, I think.
Darrell, we'll wrap it up with you, sir.
Are you confident that today we would have the bipartisan political resolve to fulfill our Article 5 obligations and put boots on the ground if that situation should arise?
Yes, and here's why.
Can you repeat that now?
All right, thank you. Yeah, the question was, am I confident that there would be enough bipartisan support for the United States government and in Congress to fulfill our Article 5 obligation? Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, which created NATO back in 1949, Article 5 is the one that says an armed attack on one shall be considered an armed attack on all. Article 5 has been invoked exactly one time, and that was on the 12th of September, the day after 9/11, when NATO agreed that this was an armed attack on our country. And it's the only time it's ever been invoked. And so I think that from what I have seen of our Congress, no matter how partisan and nasty it gets on so many other issues, generally speaking, when it comes to NATO, there is much more bipartisan support. There have been congressional delegations recently in Ukraine, expressing their support. So I would say yes, but it's not a given. I used to take it for granted until when the former president was asked, Tucker Carlson, what about Montenegro? Would you do that? And when the president of the United States goes, I don't know, those guys are kind of crazy. Never in my life did I ever imagine an American president would question that. So your question has, and there's a basis, a reason for that question. And I hope that the president tonight will use the opportunity of the State of the Union to explain why this matters. This is, this is about much more than just whether or not Ukrainians can hang on to themselves. They have such huge implications. Let me close with this. I get asked all the time, say, Hodges, are you any kin to General Courtney Hodges from World War II? No, I'm sure my grandmother would have told me if I was, but I come from a long line of privates. My father was a private. All my uncles were privates, or maybe some of them made sergeant. And in most families, the sergeant, the soldier, that's the connection of America to their military. Because when we had a draft army, and then since then, hundreds of thousands of young women and men have served. And so sergeant is probably the image that most Americans have in their mind. And I told my grandmother Davis in Quincy when I had been promoted to major, I said, Grandma, I've made major. She goes, that is so good. When are you going to be a sergeant?
And we didn't get a chance to get all your questions. Claudio Campano, who was the honorary Italian consul in North Carolina, stand up, Claudio. I know you have a question. Ben's up here right afterwards, because we're going to wrap up. Let's once again give a big round of applause to General Hodges.